I've got to run off to a doctor's appointment, so.
Thank you, Michael.
And I'll see you again tomorrow, I believe. So anyway.
We'll try and be good while you're gone, Michael.
Well, I trust you will. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hey,
Thank you.
Clark Hirschi, the area relations manager over a fair shot of the world. Thank you for all your service and the great things you do, and we'll turn the time over to Clark now and enlighten us, please.
Okay, let me see if I can get my screen to share effectively. So can you see that?
Yes.
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 I'm not going to get where I can. Oh, let's see. It's hard because I can see that, but then I can't see all of you. But let me just tell you that it's always a privilege to meet with you. As you just saw from our leader, Michael, there is never a dull moment in the church communication department in the area relations division. And Michael has had a vast amount of experience being a leader out in the areas as one of our area directors in the field. He's traveled the world. He speaks multiple languages. He's a man of many talents and a great leader. I come to you with now over 30 years of employment with the church. I worked for a few years with an advertising PR agency, and then spent the early 90s at BYU Hawaii in their university relations office, and have been in the church public affairs, now communication department, since 1994. So I'm getting to be the old man in the department. I think I've been there longer than anyone in the department. But I want to give you a little bit of background before I go through the actual slides of my presentation. If I go, if I go to that screen, there's no screen where I can see you and still do this, I guess. So, okay, I'll just stick with this. Let me tell you that until 2 years ago, we were the public affairs department. And there was kind of this fairly fine division of labor in the various functions of the church. And our job in the public affairs department was to speak with a voice for the church to an external audience. So we were dealing with media, opinion leaders, government leaders, interfaith leaders, and it was purely outwardly focused communication. And there was another office of the church, the Office of Communication Services, who grew up out of the growth of the internet age and social media and so forth. And that was the Office of Communication Services function to speak to the members. So they were responsible for LDS.org and any kind of resources if you wanted to go on the Gospel Library app or anything where you were looking for material as a member of the church, resources to teach a lesson on a Sunday, to find out where to go to church if you were on vacation, what the schedule was at a temple, and on and on and on, very member focused. And then you had the missionary department, which had Mormon.org. We won't use that anymore, but and their job was even a third function, which was to communicate to those not of our faith, but who were perhaps like-minded seekers, or those who were looking for more information about the church. And so you had a very distinct division of labor. But that brought scenarios such as the following. We have a Rome Temple open house. And well, let me add one more piece. So you've got those three functions in church headquarters. And then you've got Deseret Management Corporation, which is all the for-profit communication entities of the church. So Deseret News, Church News, KSL Radio and TV, Deseret Book, LDS Living, all of that member-facing or public-facing, depending. I mean, Deseret Book is very much for the members of the church, but KSL Radio and TV might be for a much broader audience, but for profit. And so we have a Rome Temple open house, and we have a dozen people there from Salt Lake trying to capture and tell the story. You've got the newsroom team from our office. You've got the Office of Communication Services capturing everything to communicate to the members. And you've got all the people from KSL, Deseret News, TV, radio, on and on, capturing it for their for-profit member and public audiences. And the brethren said, this is a duplication of efforts. We're not necessarily consistent with our messaging. We need to do better at this. And so 2 years ago, really not long before President Nelson became the prophet, our departments were merged and we became the church communication department. And that means that we're now responsible for all of the communication of the church to members, to non-members, to those of our faith, those who are struggling with their testimony, those who are curious about our faith, those who are reporting about our faith, those who are interacting with our faith in other religious organizations, in charitable organizations, in humanitarian efforts. We now have that full palette of the communication efforts of the church, and that's changed a great deal. And you'll see some of that as I go through this presentation. Even still, we're fine-tuning what that really means as we try and avoid duplication and seek one point of accountability and a consistent message to the world. No matter where you come in the door, you come into the same door and find the same messages and content. And that's been a great change for us. So as I go through this, I just want to tell you that we're going to talk a little bit about structure of our department and organization, some of our core purposes. And then I'm going to focus the second half on building relationships in particular, which is still a great deal of our focus, especially out in the areas where they don't have Deseret Book and Deseret Digital Media and KSL News Radio and all of that, and they don't have a strong membership base. And so it looks very different along the Pioneer Corridor than it looks around the rest of the world. As I go through this, again, I don't know exactly why, but because of my sharing the screen, I can't see all of your faces. If there are comments or questions, please jump in. I can't see your hand raised, but I would love to interact with you. This slide is to illustrate to you that we are not some anomaly out there on the sidelines of church work, of church organization, of church leadership. I think sometimes our people called in the field have felt that way, not so much anymore. And I think sometimes the members would perceive that, oh, we've got missionary, we've got welfare, we've got temple, we've got family, we've got all those core programs that we're familiar with. But many of the church would not be familiar with church communication, much less that we are led by 3 apostles. That's fairly unique. Most of the councils of the church, other than the council of the First Presidency and the Quorum of the 12, but most of the councils over temple, welfare, self-reliance, missionary, and so forth, they may have 2 apostles on their committee, but in this merge, they brought 3 apostles onto this team. And so you can see that we've got Elder Rasband as our chair of the Church Communication Committee, supported by Elder Stevenson and Elder Gong. You've got Elder Gerard, who is the executive director of our department. That's been new just again since this merger, that we had a managing director, which we still do, but unlike many of the other departments of the church, we didn't have an executive director, general authority. But that's Elder Gerard's primary responsibility as a general authority, is to direct the church communication department of the church. He's supported by Elder Bragg, Elder Schmutz, Elder Holland Jr., and Elder Christensen. Now, some of this will change. Many of these people, Elder Christensen will be going to be the area president in the South America South area come August. So some of this will change, but I just want to show you that we have significant priesthood leadership and guidance. And I don't know if there is a committee in the church that has more close personal daily contact with the senior brethren than the church communication department, because of the nature of our work, whether it's responding to crises, whether it's announcing things of the church, whether it's communicating to members, whether it's promoting a campaign of how I hear him, or give thanks, or whatever it might be. And then on this last tier, not that there's priority here, but Elder Kieran is the president, or the senior president of the presidency of the 70. And he comes there representing the interests of all of the quorums of 70 around the world, of the area presidencies in the areas that you're going to go serve in, and so forth. You have Bishop Kosei, who in the world's vernacular would be the CFO, the Chief Financial Officer. He participates in this committee very much focused on the temporal affairs of the church, buildings, temples, assets, finances, funding, all of those kinds of things. And that's in the news and important on a daily basis. So he's there. We have two sisters from the leadership of the organizations of the church. And again, Sister Harkness has been released. I don't even know who has replaced her because that just happened a few weeks ago. But Sister Eubank of the Relief Society, Sister Harkness of the primary presidency. And then some of you may not even be familiar with this brother. Elder Wickman was a full-time general authority until he reached emeritus at age 70. And that happened shortly after President Monson became the prophet. And President Monson said to Elder Wickman, okay, you may be 70 and you may be emeritus, but you're not going anywhere for as long as I'm here. And so he doesn't go do mission tours and state conference assignments and those kinds of things, but he continues as a very spry, now 80-year-old, whatever, former general authority as the general legal counsel for the church. And so he is on the church communication committee representing the legal issues. And sometimes when we have to make a statement, it's what can we or can't we say? What should we or shouldn't we say? Sometimes church communication wants to be more open and transparent. Sometimes legal is more cautious and we don't want to say anything that could be used against us in a court of law kind of thing. And finding that balance is important. But he sits on that committee for that reason and is a wonderful advisor and counselor and has been a very close partner with the public affairs, now communication department of the church for many, many, many years. And clearly President Nelson felt the same way as President Monson because he's not gone anywhere. And that's very fascinating and interesting to me. So that's the council that directs our department's work. Now, I won't show you every aspect of our department. We've grown and it's complicated, but our managing director, Michael Colmier, and then you can see these various departments and functions. And I show this to you because in the field, you might have a 2- and 3-person team trying to do all of this. And so much of it is done with missionaries such as yourselves or called people that support a newsroom team or support interfaith or whatever it might be. But I just want to show you media and messaging. You've got Eric Hawkins, and under Eric comes our media team that responds to all of the reporters and journalists that want a story about the church, want an inquiry, an interview with President Nelson, an interview with Bishop Kosei, an interview with whomever it might be. And they work on that. Also under Eric Hawkins is our newsroom team that manages our global newsroom, which is publishing multiple, sometimes dozens of stories a week, communicating the message of the church to the world. You've got a government community relations and interfaith team. This is mostly US focused, but their role is mirrored in what you do internationally in community and interfaith relations and government relations. And so Marty's team, included under him, we have an office in Washington, in New York that works with the UN, in Los Angeles that works with the consular corps there and the consulates. And then we have so we've got government and then a great focus on US government relations and on state government relations and particularly Utah government relations where the church has so much interest in what happens in the state of Utah. Lyman Kirkland and his team work with all the channels. So again, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Pinterest, Instagram, all the kinds of ways that we communicate the church's messages and selectively try and use different channels to reach different audiences, whether it's youth or in different parts of the world, they may prefer WhatsApp to something else. And so we're working with all of that. Audience experience and analytics, a little more technical, managing perceptions of the church and research and how we message. Michael Von Rosen, you've met, and this is our team that I and you fall under. Online experience, our operations, and so forth. So that gives you a feel for who we are as a department. Now, if I can just jump through here, this is our area relations team and where you fit into this. And so you can look on that main grid and look at where you're going in the world, whether it's to Micronesia, Guam in the Asia North area, or whether it's to Cambodia or Thailand in the Asia area or the Europe area. And then over here on this side, you will see me and my colleagues who support these various sectors of the world. And we each have assignments that have rotated from time to time. I've had the great privilege, again, since I'm the old man that's been here so long, I have actually supported every one of these areas of the church and have traveled to all of them but two. And it's fascinating and it's marvelous to watch the church grow and roll forth. To give you some perspective, when I came to work for the church, we didn't even have personal email addresses. The church had no official internet presence whatsoever, and we had less than 50 temples. We're now at 252 temples and counting. We have grown in terms of membership and in terms of the work that we're doing in phenomenal ways, and it's been a marvelous ride to kind of have a front row seat for that progress and growth of the church. Any questions to this point? Again, I can't see faces and hands raised, but if there are any questions, please. Can you still hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, good. This is just to give you a feel that in all that you do, I really appreciated Sister Murdoch's comment and Michael's comment that you will get out in the field, and many times the people that you're taking leadership and guidance from are younger and newer in the church and greener than you. I had the sweet occasion to be on a call a week ago Sunday with the new committee for the open house of the Cabo Verde, the Praia Cabo Verde Temple, which is a former Portuguese territory, now independent nation off the west coast of Africa, but speaks Portuguese. And this is the temple committee who's going to run the open house for this temple open house and dedication. The person with the longest membership on the church, in the church on that committee, was baptized in 2002. Some of the subcommittee chairs on that committee had been members for 2 and 4 years. I asked by the show of hands how many of them had ever been to a temple open house. I'm sure for each of you that's an experience that you've had a few times probably, perhaps many times, to go to a temple open house. On this temple committee that was going to run the temple open house, one couple of everyone on the call had ever been to a temple open house in their life. That's the kinds of experiences that many of you will have. And so your challenge will be to help and guide and support while not getting ahead of priesthood, both area presidency and the priesthood on the ground where you work. But this is just to illustrate that at every level we have priesthood leadership. Interestingly, I need to change this from public affairs to church communication, but the church communication committee answers directly to the first presidency and not even to the quorum of the 12. That is unusual because of the nature of our work and the importance of it. But at every level you can see we've got an area presidency, and a member of that area presidency is the direct priesthood advisor to our church communication council in the area. At the national level, in Area 70 supports a National Public Affairs Council or a multi-stake or coordinating council, Public Affairs Council, and a member of the stake presidency is asked to lead the efforts of a stake communication council. So at every level, this is kind of the line up through staff where we do training and support and resources. And then you've got the priesthood line, but we're connected at every level along the way. And this would give you just a feel more at the local level. Priesthood advisor, church communications, and on down to the stake level. Interestingly, there is no ward communication director function. Certainly there's a ward person that helps with newsletter and communicating to the members, the messages of the bishop, but the church communication councils, reside at the stake level and above, and if a stake president sees fit to have representation from each ward, he may do so, ward or otherwise, but that is a stake calling. And so stake communication directors, stake communication councils, and on up. So the core model would be to have a communication director, an assistant focused on relationships, and an assistant focused on channels and messaging. So the assistant over relationships might be looking at interfaith and working with the media and working with the government and community leaders in his or her part of the world. And the assistant director over messaging and channels might be helping support a newsroom, a social media channel, a Facebook, a Twitter, an Instagram account, those kinds of things, and making sure that those messages are consistent and coordinated at each level. And then we might have other specialists as needed. And in some areas, you'll see a fairly robust staff, and you'll see people called to help be writers for a newsroom, to focus particularly on minority relations or interfaith relations and so forth. And that's a luxury that many places that you're going to wouldn't have. They wouldn't have the strength and depth of membership numbers to cover that kind of spread. Now, again, I can't see your faces or show of hands, unfortunately, but if you could, I'm just curious, those of you who are fairly newly called as missionaries, tell me in a phrase or two what you perceive our core purpose is. I'm just curious your perceptions.
Ready for the message of, what's the word? Just putting out our presence in media and.
Okay, so communicating outwardly the messages and works of the church, if you will. Okay, somebody else, please.
And bringing more people unto Christ.
Okay, at the end of the day, we all need to be about that, and you can't divide between missionary and so forth, right? So at the end of the day, our goal is to bring Christ messages to the people and bring the people to Christ. Okay, other thoughts?
This is Sister Olson. I would say probably this would be the legs of the priesthood on the ground. In other words, we can do a lot of the work, but everything we do is to support them and hand it off once relationships are made, to introduce priesthood to relationships, and then move back to support those relationships.
Excellent. Thank you, Sister Olson. That's spot on. And that's exactly what we're about. We used to talk about that our core purpose was to build strategic relationships with opinion leaders who could affect the reputation of the church and whose actions and behavior and influence could either help or hinder the church. And that is still very much part of our core model. But I think Sister Olson really hit on a very valid point. Our job independently is to assist the priesthood leadership and church leadership, because I would include the sisters who lead the primary Young Women Relief Society and so forth. But our job is to help the church leadership communicate the messages of the church to the world, and also then to reflect back to church leadership how that's going, where there are issues, where there are concerns, what they ought to be sensitive to, where they maybe could focus their messaging and efforts. So we're about relationships, and we're about messaging and communicating. And we are, as Sister Olson suggested, kind of the spokesperson, the errands, the hands and feet of the priesthood in helping communicate the messages of the gospel, of the church, of the prophets of Christ to the world, and in building these strategic relationships. And before I go any further, I would just say that in some ways, ideally, each of you's job is to put yourself out of a job. At the end of the day, we'd love to have the church be independent and not need our young missionaries or our senior missionary couples. That's a long ways away in many parts of the world, obviously. But as you do your work, know that you're not building relationships for you. you're helping facilitate relationships between local church leadership and opinion leaders in the community, between members of the church and those not of our faith. And your job is to help bring those others along. If you, in some cases, you're going to have the ability to get in a door that others can't because you're a foreigner, you're going to be seen as a successful, wealthy, distinguished, mature couple. And sometimes you'll get in a door that perhaps maybe one of the locals couldn't get through. On the other hand, you need to help them get through that door and take them along with you. In other cases, you'll find that you won't get through the door, depending on perceptions about white North Americans or perceptions about the US government at any given time, and depending on who our president is and which part of the world you're in and whatever, you might not be able to get in the door as the foreigner, and you may very much need the locals to help you go begin to build and establish these relationships. But at the end of the day, the goal is to build local relationships and help establish things that can carry on long after you're gone. You know, area presidents come and go, mission presidents come and go, but the local membership, stake presidents, area 70s, Relief Society presidents, bishops, branch presidents, those people are there for the duration. And we need to help them learn how and gain the confidence to go do this work themselves and build and maintain these relationships long after you're back home reacquainting with the new grandkids. So now we are, this will be amusing to you, but this is indicative of the church. The wheels move slowly in some cases. We were combined from the Office of Communication Services and the Public Affairs Department into the Church Communication Department 2 years plus now ago. We still do not have our official approved charter approved by correlation and all the various committees and brethren of the church. So this is a work in progress. And I think you'll experience that in the field as we continue to try and learn our place, what the brethren want from us, how we interact with other departments, and how they communicate their messages, cooperating with us and so forth. But at present, this is a fairly good summary of the principal responsibilities and focuses of our department as given to us. I mean, we've been working on this with that Church Communication Committee for 2 years. But I just want to point out a few things. In addition to what Sister Olson and others of you said about communicating, being the hands and legs of the priesthood and the church leadership, of sharing gospel messages and the church's messages, of bringing people to Christ, that has been distilled down into these principal functions. Increasing understanding of the church, building relationships with people and communities and organizations to help achieve the church's mission, extending the reach of the church, and that would be messages. And, you know, if we had time, we could talk about what's happened with General Conference because of COVID. In so many ways, I see the Lord's hand in COVID, and he kind of forced us out of our comfort zone. And because members couldn't go to the chapels to watch General Conference in many parts of the world where they don't have the bandwidth to sit and watch it in their home, in their pajamas, eating waffles. So they would go to the church. And when suddenly they couldn't go to the church because of COVID, we felt we were going to lose many of the members of the church being able to enjoy the blessings of conference. And so we began, again, 1.5 years ago, April conference a year ago, or before that, finding ways to get conference available to the members. And so we've seen an incredible increase in the exposure to conference to those not of our faith, because we've worked with national radio and TV stations to put it on the airwaves so members could watch it in their own homes, or as they are on the streets in their car, like the Olsons. You know, we saw pictures of a taxi driver who was watching conference in his taxi on his phone, first time ever, and marvelous experiences happening in terms of extending the reach of the church. So here are the core principles from this new charter for us. This is what President Nelson has asked. He wants one consistent voice one voice for the church. And again, I remember when the church didn't have an official internet presence. And so you had many well-intentioned members trying to tell the church's story and represent who we were, what we believe, and so what we believe in. And sometimes that didn't gel. And then we got better and did have official church presence, but we had the missionary department telling a story one way. We had priesthood family department telling a story another way. We had seminary and institute trying to speak to the youth and young adults in another way. And there was considerable overlap and inconsistency and incongruity and even sometimes conflict in that messaging. So we are now being directed to have one voice, one unified message, and one single point of accountability. And that means that as messages go out from the church to the world, we've kind of become this funnel where all the departments, all the entities ought to be working through church communication to make sure that we are consistent in our messaging, that we understand what's being done and said, that we determine the right channel to get the right message to the right audience. And you'll hear more about that in your training in these next few days as you're exposed to the church's websites and social media and some of the other of my colleagues' work and work with you in training. Here's just a little bit more from the charter. Improve global understanding of his church and its true identity, build global relationships. These are the pieces that really fit, in my mind, to the work that most of you will be doing as you go out and serve your missions. Help leaders, employees, volunteers, and partners understand audience needs and experiences. This is something that we've done pretty good over the years at pushing messages out. We haven't done as well at listening. And if any of you are familiar with, Stephen Covey's Habits of Highly Successful People or what have you, first seek to understand and then to be understood. I think we're doing better at this understanding and trying to know what the youth are thinking and experience and feeling and how messages resonate with them in the church and young adults, what those not of our faith hear and perceive and understand about us by our behavior, by the images we use. A portrayal of Christ that we might be familiar with to another part of the world might look very foreign to what Christ looks like in their mind. The images that we put in gospel messages, is it very much a Wasatch Front, very first world, lovely homes? I was amused at one of the videos where the service project was installing this lovely new cement sidewalk to this home for this family that lived on this street. And I mean, in most parts of the world, that family wasn't in need. They were living an opulent lifestyle compared to many. And so we have to be careful that our messaging, both in images and in the colors and genders and faces and clothes and textures and looks of us, really reflects a global church and speaks to a worldwide audience. And so we're now collaborating more with church magazines and with many other departments so that we're all trying to do this communicating better. This will be one that you'll be involved with, helping these volunteers and training and building capacity. Many of you, I predict, will be asked to go help train a newly called stake communication council. Or this is a challenging and interesting one. I remember times getting called from a new General Authority 70 or Area 70 saying, Brother Hirschi, I just got this calling, and as part of my calling in my portfolio is the church communication function. I now support the Church Communication Council in XYZ geographic unit of the church. Tell me what you do. Tell me what I do. Tell me what my job is. That's humbling to be training priesthood leaders who you answer to, but sometimes you'll understand more about the issue than they do, and your job will be to gather all of the pertinent information and go to them and then seek their counsel and advice or their approval for your recommendation before you move forward. So building capacity and training in your areas, and then proactively sharing the message of the church, including with the media. Murdoch's, am I done at 10? Or am I supposed to be done at 10? I don't-
We have going until 10:15. If you're done at 10, we're good. We can
Okay, I just want to make sure that I don't take too much time.
take all the
Okay, so if we were in a room together, I'd have you take turns reading these messages or these questions, but I think that they're relevant to the conversation today, and that is which opinion leaders and how many. In my mind, a true relationship with an opinion leader has to be mutually beneficial and two-way, and that means we can't have relationships on that level with 100 key opinion leaders in our area. And so at the stake level, we might encourage the State Communication Council to have 12 meaningful relations, maybe 3 or 4 with local leaders of other congregations or religious organizations, 2 or 3 media, 2 or 3 government, 2 or 3 community, and that would probably max out in real circumstances the kinds of meaningful relationships that a called, very part-time State Communication Council might be able to manage and maintain effectively and help their priesthood maintain those relationships. At a national level, it might be a few more than that, but we have to be strategic in who we are looking for those relationships. And we have to decide why these people are not someone else. And in this, I suggest that when you get to your areas, you do lots of listening and learning and observing for a while first. But in some cases, you'll find that the people that are there, maybe if they've had their calling for a little while, they're very comfortable with some relationships that they have with some people, but those people may no longer even be in office. There may have been an election since then, and we've got a relationship with the former whatever, but now we've got someone new who's leading whichever organization or government entity or religious organization. And so this is a constantly evolving process of determining who the key people are in whichever scenario or setting and how we maintain relationships with them and not others. What is a relationship and what is the intended outcome? We've talked a little bit about that already. And then how do we get it done? And so I'm now going to focus on a little bit of how we get it done and how we know when we've got the kind of relationship that would be meaningful and useful to the church and to church leadership. So when we talk about strategic, I would suggest that when you get to the areas, one of the first things that you do in your assignments, and before you get there in this COVID world really, is find out what the priesthood priorities are. I can tell you that every area presidency, by direction from the 12, has an area plan. And that area plan includes some very specific goals and objectives for the short term and the longer term in that area. It might be strengthening and reactivating the youth. It might be working to get closer to being self-sufficient in terms of the missionaries needed in our area and those being called from our area. It might be more tithing, faithfulness, and temple recommend worthiness as they prepare for temples that are being built. There are all sorts of those. Certainly they're going to be influenced by what they're hearing from their senior leadership in the First Presidency and the 12 as they're trained. And so some of that is kind of directed from Salt Lake, but some of it's very unique to the areas. And in some areas of the church might have a good reputation, and that might not be an issue. In other areas of the church, we may be totally unknown and have no reputation. And so we need to be brought out of obscurity. In other areas, we might be battling a negative reputation, depending on, again, the part of the world, what's known about us, what stories have been told by the media, what preconceived ideas people have. And so each of the areas will have an area plan. I encourage you to get it and be familiar with it, and then work to make sure that your work and those that you're working with and under work to make their work align with priesthood priorities and priesthood objectives. And that would be very important. And so we're going to now talk about this 3-step process, and the determining the what and the why very much has to do with, again, what the priesthood priorities are. So you need to learn what is on the minds of your priesthood leaders? What are the major challenges in their part of the world? I currently support 2 areas in Latin America and 2 areas, the 2 Europe areas. Very, very different. It would be amazing to think that the church has been in Europe since shortly after the Restoration. I mean, missionaries were on the European continent in the 1830s, and yet in so many parts of Europe we are still unknown and really quite obscure and a very, very small minority. And then you have places in Latin America, in Brazil and in Chile and Argentina and Peru, where we have hundreds of thousands of members. You know, in Mexico alone, we have 1.5 million members and counting. Brazil, similar. If you were to take all of Latin America, it's now 40% of the total membership of the church is in Latin America and speaking Spanish or Portuguese, and that's counting. The day will come when there will be more native Spanish speakers in the church than English speakers in the church at the rate the church is growing. And so learning what those priesthood priorities and objectives are in different parts of the world. In one place, it might be bringing the church out of obscurity. In another place, it might be defending religious liberty and traditional values. In Europe East, it's just keeping permission that we can even keep a chapel open and get missionary visas to be in Russia and Ukraine and some of those parts of the world. So what are the priesthood priorities? What are the issues facing the church? What keeps them up at night? And then, to me, this is the other side of that mutually beneficial two-way street that I mentioned earlier. We also need to know what the concerns are in the community. And I would submit to you that the same concerns that concern our priesthood leaders, our parents, our educators in the church are the same concerns throughout the world. Poverty, crime, illiteracy, deteriorating families, never enough finances to cover all the needs of the poor and the needy, of the environment, of cleaning the streets and the parks and the waterways and the beaches. And so we're not so very different from our colleagues and associates with whom we want relationships in all these other organizations. Government leaders have the same concerns: education, poverty, family, civility, all those kinds of things. Other religious leaders, they worry about losing their youth. They worry about values and morals. They worry about the disintegration of the family. So the challenge is finding the common ground between our church leaders and these other opinion leaders with whom we need a relationship so that we can work together for education, literacy, welfare, humanitarian, religious liberty, moral values, and so forth. So here's some examples of priorities that I pulled directly from area plans some years ago. Flood the area with positive messages about the church and our members and our missionaries. Strengthen the youth. Help missionaries find greater acceptance. In some parts of the world, the people love our missionaries. In other parts of the world, they're very skeptical and skittish about our missionaries. And if they see the missionaries coming, they're ducking in, hiding, closing their door, going in the backyard, whatever. Increase tithing faithfulness and temple recommends. I've mentioned some of these. Become self-reliant in welfare and full-time missionaries, and so forth. So those are some examples of priesthood concerns and priesthood priorities, but you can see how most of those would also be very relevant to leaders in the community with whom we would be looking for a relationship. What are the biggest challenges in the community? What keeps them up at night? Budgets, crime, education, all the things that we just mentioned. So once we see those priorities of our priesthood and our church leaders, and then we look for who we need a relationship with in community to help advance those same causes and concerns. And so we're talking some kind of core areas that will be fairly obvious to you: government leaders, religious leaders, ethnic and minority leaders, media influencers, academics. This is one that I think sometimes is neglected and forgotten. though we're doing better at it, and much of the partnering we do with BYU and otherwise. But you stop and think about it. If you've got a world religious or a teacher at a university level teaching on world religions, or on values and morality, or on the family construct, or on civil society and what should be championed, religious liberty versus civil liberties, human rights versus, you look at a lot of that, and if the academic community speaks ill of the church, they influence a whole generation, much like parents influence a whole generation. And so if we can have favorable relationships with professors and leaders at universities and university presidents and those who work in those settings, they influence the whole generation for the positive. And so we've seen a great deal done in academic settings. And then community and civic organizations, and here I might specify NGOs, other partnering organizations with whom we do humanitarian and charitable work. More and more, the church has made it clear we don't want to just go out and throw money at a crisis or a problem in a part of the world. We want to go partner with the people in the community and with other organizations in the community so this can be sustained for the long term. And so we don't just go dig a well and provide clean water, or go deliver neonatal resuscitation. We go train doctors and nurses on neonatal resuscitation. We go work with the community and partner with them, and they dig the line between the borehole and the pumps in the town where people can pump fresh water, and they take ownership, and we work together and we partner with other organizations so that this can go on for the long term and that the local folks have ownership. So that's kind of some of those examples. Again, I mentioned to you, we can't have a relationship with everyone. And so based on priesthood priorities and opportunities and finding that common ground, we would have a selected list. They shouldn't be on the list just because they have a position of authority or power, or just because we've had a relationship with them in the past. It needs to be strategic to accomplish the objectives and end needs of the church as well as for them. So again, if we were together, I'd have you read these questions as we go around the room. And because I can't see you and because of the sound connects, I'll just read them. Forgive me for talking so much, but here's some great questions, and I think they're so very relevant and they will resonate with you. If President Nelson were to announce a new temple in, and I think of all the places you're going to, someone's going to Micronesia, Guam. There's a temple being built in Guam. 5 years ago, that would have seemed far-fetched. Cambodia, and so on and so forth. We just had 20 additional temples announced 3 weeks ago in General Conference. Brothers and sisters, if President Nelson were to announce a temple, who do we need to have a good relationship with to assure a smooth permitting and construction process? That is a reality, brothers and sisters. We're still working on some of these temples that have been announced, and I'm convinced that President Nelson announced them not knowing how it was going to all play out in India, in China, in Russia, and yet we see it moving forward. Some of you will be involved in that process of helping facilitate the construction and or open house of a temple. And so that's a very legitimate question to ask. And we'll see more of them in the future. They're getting far and wide. And so nowhere in my mind is too remote where I think, oh, that's not going to happen here. Anywhere that any one of you is going to serve, that has or could happen. I'm convinced of that. Here's another very wonderful, valid scenario. We have younger missionaries going to more far-flung places. If a missionary or member did something foolish or illegal, how would the media respond? Would they give us a chance to talk? Would they vilify us in the news, or would they recognize that that's not the norm and that's not what we teach our missionaries or our members? And I could give you all sorts of scenarios. I can tell you that I have one son that every day he was on his mission, I prayed he wouldn't do something foolish or illegal. He's impetuous, he's adventurous, and I just prayed, don't let him do something that'll get him in trouble with the law. But I could tell you stories. One that comes to my mind very quickly off the top of my head. fairly local. In Colorado, there is a park, a hillside, a shrine area that belongs to the Catholic Church. Some of our missionaries were there on a P-Day, taking pictures, recreating a little bit. One of the statues was broken. The head was broken. The missionaries didn't break it, but not thinking very carefully, one of the missionaries picked up the head of the statue, held it in his arm, and mugged for a picture for his companion. His companion took the picture, and later that got posted on a Facebook page or something. And oh boy, the local priest of that Catholic community was up in arms and wanted all the missionaries kicked out of that part of Colorado, all of Colorado for that matter, if he had his way. And we had to work through that issue, and we had to work through relationships that we did have with wonderful Catholic leaders and have them come to our aid and defense. And because they knew us from our support of their Catholic Youth Day and partnering on many other things, a senior Catholic leader was willing to go calm that Catholic leader down and smooth over that scenario. So to who would we turn to minimize damage or to get fair treatment? So those are some examples of some scenarios that might be thought-provoking, but as you get to your areas, take some time to observe, to listen, to learn, to find out what's happening, what the concerns of the priesthood leaders are, what the challenges are, what the opportunities are, and how you can make a difference based on, again, those concerns of priesthood, of local community leaders, and some of these scenarios. Then the next, after we determine the what of the relationship, why we need relationships, and who we need relationships with, again, media, government, influencers, and so forth, then my granddaughter just arrived. I need to close the door. Just 1 second. Then we talk about how we go about achieving these relationships, and we build a roadmap. And your plan, as you get to your areas and help train a stake or a national council, would involve a roadmap for each of these individuals and organizations with whom we need a relationship. And so the roadmap is going to include things like, who has the responsibility? Is there a time frame involved? Do we want to have someone reach out and within the next 3 months have a meeting between a member of the area presidency or a member of the stake presidency or an area 70 with XYZ leader of an organization? So we build ownership and stewardship, a time frame involved, and then plan a proposed process for how we get to them. And I repeat that in order for these relationships to be meaningful, they must be relevant for both parties. If the first time that one of these opinion leaders hears from us is when we need a visa or a building permit or forgiveness for one of our members or missionaries or whatever it might be, if that's the first time they hear from us, that's an uphill road, a tough sell, and not so easy. And so we need to be building these relationships for the long term, before the crisis comes, before the temple is announced, before we need another missionary visa, those kinds of things. They need to be appropriate. We need to ask and build the right kind of relationships with the right people. And so here's where I'm going to give you a little bit of homework. As you get out into the areas, before you really go seeking these relationships, part of your job is to learn about these people, know about them, their organization, their main interests and priorities that they have on their agenda, their family, their background and history, so that you can find common ground. You need to learn about them. And we live in a day when you can go do a Google search and quickly find out about organizations and their charter, their guiding principles, their objectives, what they've accomplished, what they hope to accomplish, who's on their board, who's their staff. You can find so much, but you need to, you and the people you work with in the areas need to do that homework and be informed. We can't show up uninformed. Let me give you a great example that comes to mind, and I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but this training meeting that we just had with the Cabo Verde Temple Committee. My colleague from another department who was working with me on that meeting was talking to them about the people that would be giving the VIP tours and helping host the opinion leaders and the media through the temple open house. And he talked about that we would be using a lot of their former stake presidents and so forth. And I had to remind him that there's only one stake in the whole temple district. There are a couple of districts and one stake of very young, green, inexperienced members of the church. So we don't have the depth to use a whole cadre of former mission presidents and Relief Society presidents and stake presidencies and bishops to guide those tours. They don't have that depth in terms of numbers or in terms of experience in the church. That's an example of being informed and being mindful of your audience. You need to be, when you get to the areas, I encourage you to immerse yourself in the local area. Newspapers, read the newspapers, watch the news in the evenings, get to know the issues, the conversation, the journalists, the opinion leaders. What are the main topics being discussed? Be informed in the areas that you get to know. And sometimes it's not so much articles about us and what matters to us as articles about these opinion leaders, what they've said or what's being said about them. Are they in the news because someone's angry at them? Are they in the news because they're accomplishing good things? Are they in the news because they're trying to accomplish good things? And this needs to be fairly broad. I could give you wonderful examples of areas where prior to the elections, our church communication director, together with the priesthood, is reaching out to all of the candidates to have a one-on-one, to learn about them, to let them know the things that matter to us, and to begin to build a relationship, because one of them is going to get elected and be the new mayor, governor, president, whatever. And we need relationships on every side of the political equation. And so that's a good example. Things being said about them, as I mentioned, issues that are important to us and to them. Trends, things that are happening in society. Let me give you a classic example that comes to mind. I used to support the Caribbean area, and in the Caribbean, for the youth ages 12 to 20, 12 to 24, 40% of the youth in the Caribbean, and this applies in the church almost as much as outside the church, 40% of the youth were what they called knees. They were neither in school nor employed. You stop and think about that. 40% of this major youth group that would be for us, our youth and our young adults in that cadre of age range, 40% of them are not in school, nor are they employed. What does that mean they're doing? They're sitting around doing nothing, looking for something to entertain them, looking for trouble, getting in trouble, premarital sex, drugs and alcohol, vandalism and crime, and on and on and on. That's a huge concern for both our church leaders and the leaders in that community. So, in cooperation with the priesthood leaders, our area communication director took the For the Strength of Youth pamphlet and developed a generic, non-denominational version that could apply to and be used with group youth in any religious group or in any part of society. It's called now My Standards instead of For the Strength of Youth, and they had wonderful success. And the vice president of the country was so enamored with it that she asked for more. Anyway, I could go on, but that's an example of there's some major troubling trends and statistics for the youth in that part of the world. And so the church and church leaders look for ways to respond to that and develop tools and resources that can be used by other religious leaders, by educational leaders, and that spoke to these youth and helped instill values and guidance and guidelines and goals and aspirations for these youth. And it was very successful. And it was what Michael would refer to as reverse innovation, because it happened in the area And then we brought it to headquarters and developed some of those tools on a more global scale that could be used not just in the Caribbean, but around the world to help the youth, the rising generation. I've mentioned that the relationships need to be two-way, that we need to seek to know and understand as much as we want to be heard. It can't just be pushing the church's message out. We need this, we want this, here's what you should know about us, here's what you should be doing. It has to be mutually beneficial and reciprocated. It has to be of benefit to them in their circle, in their world of importance. So you need to know their world, know their responsibilities, their interests, their projects, their needs. I can guarantee you that any community leader out there is understaffed and underfunded. And so a wonderful opportunity is to go knock on a community leader's door and seek an appointment and say, this is an example I'm giving you. You know, every year we have our youth get together for what we call a youth conference, and they have workshops and seminars and dances and sporting activities and inspirational messages. But as part of that, we love to have a service project. I'm wondering if you have a need in your community that we might respond to with our youth. And perhaps you could provide the trees and we can go do the planting, or you can provide the dump trucks and the dumpsters and the garbage bags, and we'll clean up the beach or the park or the waterway or whatever it might be. Perhaps you have a school or an orphanage that's run down that needs a new coat of paint and some repair. You provide the paint and the tools and those kinds of things. And again, your job usually, at least in the first encounter, will be to explore opportunities and then go back to your council and to your priesthood leaders and say, we've learned this and this and this, and we recommend this for these reasons. Do we have your blessing to proceed? So you're not going to go commit the church, neither our members or our resources, without priesthood approval, but you can certainly go explore ways where the church, our youth, our young single adults can go make a difference and look for ways that we can reach out in the community. Protocol is another important thing. As you go to different parts of the world, things are done differently. And sometimes it's a handshake, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's an email, sometimes it's a very formal letter in the mail. And we need to do it right. And if you don't know the right way, it's okay to reach out and ask. You might make a phone call to a community leader and say, we'd like to invite you to our upcoming state conference, our upcoming youth conference, our upcoming Helping Hands Service Day, or our temple open house, whatever it might be. Could you please tell us the proper salutation to put on the invitation? Is it His Honorable so-and-so? Is it, and find titles, references. Do we send it in the mail? Do we send it to their home? Do we send it to their office? All of those kinds of things we need to do right. And if we don't know the right way, it's great to call and ask and make inquiry. That's much better than doing it the wrong way. And they'll be thrilled that you want to invite them to something, and their secretary will be happy to offer you the proper salutation, title, greetings, address, whatever it might be. But we need to follow proper protocol. And I've used this example, and I've only ever seen it happen once, but if the person that you need and want a relationship with is at the level that they're used to being called His Honorable or His Highness or His Most Reverend whatever, then that's the way we call them. And if they're used to stepping out of their car onto a red carpet and the red carpet leads them into wherever they're meeting with whomever, then we better have the red carpet. Now that's an extreme example, but I submit to you that it's important. And I've learned that that's two-way. When we invite people to BYU, to Salt Lake Church headquarters, to wherever, we respond to all of that. And if they're a Muslim leader that expects a place where they can have their call to prayer 5 times a day, I've seen our hosting office establish a room in the Joseph Smith Memorial Building with white sheets on the floor and facing the right direction so that they can go pray facing Mecca at whatever hour of the day they need to. And if we want them to come and have an experience at headquarters, we need to make sure that they can still fulfill their personal obligations. So those are the kinds of things. And I've seen, on the other hand, I've seen some of our church leaders at the very highest levels say things such as, and I'm paraphrasing, but I've heard essentially this message: I'm an apostle of the Lord Jesus Christ, and I meet with kings, presidents, and magistrates. In other words, we're not going to arrange a meeting between an apostle and the local PTA president. And that's maybe a far-fetched example, but we need to make sure that there's commensurate levels of status and importance. And if we want a meeting with this governor or president, then we better offer an apostle or an area president, or and so forth. You understand my message. We need to make sure that we're looking for the appropriate levels of relationships at every level, from the stake to the national to the area to so forth. And so we need to be appropriate. And I've now mentioned some of this already. Sometimes we might need to find who has a relationship that can help us open the door. And so we might put a feeler out among the members of the church in the ward or among our communication council. Who do we know that has access to or could help us in initiating a relationship with so-and-so? And so sometimes that may be someone that is a neighbor, someone that went to school. I can remember we were trying to reach someone and they had gone to graduate school at Stanford with President Hinckley's son. It was a wonderful entree into the relationship. And so you might even play this 6 degrees of separation, where how many people do we need to go through to get to I know so-and-so who knows so-and-so and work that way. I would caution you that if you do that, and as you do that, we involve them in the relationship, and we continue to involve them in the relationship until such point as they either say, look, you know them now, why don't you just go talk to them directly? You don't need to work through me anymore. Or until the person with whom we have a relationship reaches out directly to us instead of going through that intermediary. But we want to respect relationships, and we don't want to use someone to get a relationship and then completely bypass them and sideline them as soon as they've helped us get the relationship. We need to be very circumspect and respectful in these relationships. This last point I think is really important. How we approach individuals in and out of the church will speak volumes about who we are and who we represent. And we must be Christ-like in those relationships and those outreaches. And again, I submit that applies internally as well. Some of your most strategic relationships will be with the other players in the area office, with missionary couples that are working on humanitarian welfare and self-reliance, or with a mission president and a couple of his missionaries. So again, we need to make sure that we're building appropriate relationships and being respectful, both internal relationships with the stake president, with the Area 70, with the area presidency, with other departments and leadership of the church, as well as with those external relationships that we're seeking. This is an interesting one, and I'm not here to tell you exactly how to do it. But I would submit to you that perhaps the church is more known for our missionaries than anything else in the church, more than welfare service, more than temples, more than whatever. Our missionaries walk 2 by 2 around the world, and these people with whom we're trying to seek relationships have had at least some exposure, positive or negative, to our missionaries. And they understand that missionaries run around in twos with name tags. And when they learn that you're a missionary of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, what is their very first preconceived perception or idea going to be? Someone speak out.
That you're going to try and convert them.
Exactly right. That you're there to preach and try and convert them. That you're going to try and give them a Book of Mormon, preach to them about Joseph Smith, or get them in the waters of baptism. And that's challenging in the kind of world that you're going into. And so sometimes you might have to dispel that right off the bat and say, look, you probably know our church for our missionaries, and my husband and I, or my wife and I, we're here as missionaries, but we're not proselytizing missionaries. We're not here to preach to you about the gospel. We're here to discuss whatever. And I've even heard of missionaries who, for a few minutes, slip that name tag off and put it in their pocket to kind of break down the barriers and the walls that immediately go up when they hear missionary, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Oh, the Mormons are coming to convert me or preach to me. And so you'll need to find the right way to navigate that. But you need to go into this relationship building knowing that that's the preconceived idea, that you're missionaries, that you're there to preach and convert. And that will be something that you'll have to navigate and consider very carefully as you go about your work. You need to ask and listen as much as you talk and tell. You might need to give them some background on the church and what the church has done in their community. We have some wonderful summaries of all of the humanitarian work that's been done in a given country, or in a given state or community. You might want to work with your Welfare Self-Reliance's manager or your First Contact in Salt Lake or your area director in the area office to get access to that and use that to show the good works of the church. By their fruits ye shall know them. And I think here I'll just mention very briefly, I think it's a wonderful challenge. In Matthew, in the New Testament, you've got Matthew 6, which says, "Do not your alms before men, but do them secretly, and your Father which seeth in secretly will reward you openly." Something to that effect. That's probably not a perfect quote of that scripture. But then you've got Matthew 5:16 that says, "Ye are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill should not be hid, neither do men light a candle and put it under a bushel, but on a candlestick, and it giveth light unto all that are in the house. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven." In our work, especially since President Monson and since President Hinckley and moving forward, President Hinckley was about letting our light so shine before men that they may see our good works. And so if I go mow my neighbor's lawn or babysit my neighbor's kids because they're sick, or whatever I do, bake a casserole for the neighbor who's sick or just had a death in the family or lost their job, that's Matthew 6 kind of stuff, where we don't need to go to fast and testimony meeting the next Sunday and say, "I'm so great. I baked a neighbor for Elder and Sister Green last week because they weren't feeling well." That's not what it's about. But institutionally, as a church, we do need to be known for our good works so that government leaders and others will see us for those good works and be willing to partner with us, work with us, allow our missionaries to have visas to come into their country, and so forth. So there's another fine balance between doing not your alms before men and letting your light so shine that you'll need to work with. And sometimes you'll need to work with priesthood leaders and your colleagues of other departments who are a little more reticent. And again, we've come a long way. We have a wonderful relationship with the Welfare Self-Reliance Department at headquarters, and we partner so much on these humanitarian initiatives. But that's a balance, and sometimes you might find some resistance to letting our light so shine versus doing not our alms before men and doing the right thing for the right reason at the right time. So I mentioned earlier, you might ask how the church might help, what their needs are, and take a list of priorities from them and then go back and say, okay, what can we reasonably respond to? But you're not going to go promise church funds or church labor. You're going to go explore ideas and then go back and seek counsel and approval from your priesthood leaders. And finally, I would just say that you're not going to always have a home run win every time you meet with folks. But if it doesn't go well on the first encounter, or it doesn't become this love fest and warm, chummy relationships and friends for life, whatever you do, make sure that it doesn't go south because you weren't prepared and didn't understand the proper protocol and how to treat these people with the proper respect that their position or title merited. So very quickly in closing, my time is almost up. I've got 1 minute left. Relationships are formed between individuals not institutions. They must be mutually beneficial and demand common interest. They need to be natural and sincere and voluntary, and they need to be for the long term, which is why, again, I say, take the locals with you. You're going to go serve a mission and come home. They're going to be there for the long term. Help empower them, give them confidence, show them how to do this, and take them along and learn from them in terms of the cultural nuances and sensitivities. They must be professional and reflect the church and our values and standards and our leaders and our Savior, our ultimate leader. And they require ongoing maintenance. Now, we've talked about some core purposes. We've talked about the structure. We've talked about this process of what and who and how. So one of the final questions, I think, is how do we know when we've arrived? And I'll never forget an experience I had many, many years ago with Clayton Christensen. Many of you would know him. He taught at Harvard Business School. He wrote books. He was a speaker with a speaker's fee, I don't know how large, to go help and train and teach corporations and organizations how to be successful. He understood relationship building. One time when I was supporting the Boston Key City, we went back and met with him and kind of reviewed some of this prior to a training meeting we were going to have the next night with his public affairs councils in the greater Boston area. He said, so how do you measure success? How do you know when you've got there? And we talked about that, and we had some responses for him, but I learned some things from him. Here's what I would submit to you. You'll know that you have meaningful relationships when those opinion leaders are willing to endorse the church and say, yeah, we should invite them to our interfaith council. Yes, we should allow them to participate in whatever. I know these people, they're good people, that kind of thing. When they're willing to authorize the church to build the chapel, to build the temple, to give the building permits, to whatever it might be, to have legal recognition in a country. When they're willing to come to our defense, when we're in a setting or in a meeting, or when someone is speaking ill of the church and they say, that's not the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints I know. That hasn't been my experience with members and representatives of this church. I find them to be very kind, to be very fair, to be very service-oriented, to be very equitable, those kinds of things. Those three I've understood and known for a long time. In recent years, I've added this fourth one. And before I put it up on the board, I'll just ask, if you have a great friend, when you're in a time of need, what do you do? Somebody jump in.
Ask for help.
Ask for help, right? We want friendship such that when they're in need, they're willing to call and ask us for help. Look, we're struggling with this. Our cathedral just burned down. We need a place to meet. We don't have enough hands. I could give you wonderful, wonderful examples of interfaith leaders coming to our mission presence and saying, we've seen your missionaries and you've talked about service. We need some help for our Jewish celebration, our Greek Orthodox celebration. Could you send some of your missionaries to help us? When there's that level of trust and understanding and support that they're willing to get on the phone and ask us for help, we know we have a meaningful relationship with them. I've already talked about all this and my time is up. So let me just conclude by quitting sharing my screen. I'd like to see your faces again. Let me just conclude by sharing my feelings that this is part of the Lord's work. It's every bit as important and in many cases must precede temple work, family history work, missionary work, and the many other works that we all understand in the church. We all get missionary work. We all understand family history and getting names to the temple and the need to build temples and get visas. And this is the groundwork. In many ways, elders and sisters, you're going to be the John the Baptist to prepare the way. You're going to go clear the rocks out of the field so that someone else can plant and harvest. You might not ever see the harvest, but I submit to you that church public affairs communication work is the Lord's work. We're led by prophets and apostles. They're very mindful of what we're doing, of what you're doing. They know about this work. When they get into the areas, they know we have church communication and public affairs and government relations missionaries out there. And they value your work and know that many times your work precedes some of the other work that must happen before the second coming of the Savior. When President Nelson talks about the most important work is gathering Israel on both sides of the veil, some of that gathering can't happen until doors are opened and relationships are built and trust and friendship is established that then allows us to gather Israel. So I submit to you that the Lord is in this work. You'll be blessed. I would say to you, he knows what you need to do. He knows what you need to accomplish. Go read and study and learn and do all these things we've talked about, and then go to your knees and he will help you. And as I loved Michael's quote at the beginning where President Nelson said, when we've done all that we can, and then he has stepped in. And I'm sure that somewhere in this next few days from Sean Donnelly, you'll hear reference to D&C 124, where he talks about we do all within it's in our power, and then we sit back and trust that the Lord will do his work. And I submit to you that he will, and he will use you. And each of you have had experiences in your life, in your church callings, in your families, in your professional settings, in your social services, and whatever the experiences of your life that will come into play and be exactly the experience and the background that's needed at a particular time, in a particular place, in the place where you've been called to serve. And I testify of that and of this work, that it's the Lord's work. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen.